Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Libration Nation. This week, I am coming to you with The Book of Night Women by Booker Prize winner Marlon James. And my guest this week is Elizabeth Klaczynski. Elizabeth is a public historian and curator currently living in Richmond, Virginia. She blames the American Girls series for her love of both history and reading. Elizabeth usually has her head buried in a book, but you can also find her anywhere there is water or playing with her very spoiled fur babies. Also, our drink this week is made with Equiano rum. Equiano is the first African and Caribbean rum distillery in the world, and I explain a little bit of how that connects with the story once we get started. And with that being said, I've had some people ask how they can support the show right now. I'm not asking for money just yet at this point. However, I would love just the support of maybe all of my listeners. If you enjoy the show, telling a friend about it this week, telling someone why you love it and why it's important to you and why you're listening. So, all right, with that being said, let's get started. Thanks. All this stuff. Yeah. So I don't know if I told you the cat's name is Little Lady.
I'm so sorry, baby.
She's okay.
She's
That's her.
Okay.
She's sweet, but she's pretty skittish. So
that's okay.
So we're here today, and we're going to be talking about the Book of Night Women by Marlon James.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, it's a long one.
It is.
It is. But I was into it.
It's incredible. Did you read it?
I read the whole thing.
Oh,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. It's a journey of a book.
Yeah.
Like, it's intense.
Yeah.
but I love it.
Yeah. I thought it was really good. I was glad you brought it. And so, okay, well, we're going to talk about it. I haven't even told you yet about why the rum that I picked. Okay. The Book of Night Women, it's set in Jamaica. It is the experience of slaves, and which we're obviously going to talk about. But I was trying to figure out what we were going to drink with. I mean, I've read, there's a lot of really great slave narratives out. I've read quite a few, but this was heavy. This was definitely heavy.
It's very heavy, and it's different than a lot of other narratives and accounts. Yeah.
And I was struggling. The point of this podcast is let's have an interesting discussion that's enjoyable for us and enjoyable for people to listen to, and that's sort of why I incorporate the drink with it. But what drink do you pair with slave narratives?
Yeah, I know.
I love it, and I think it's important. So I did find a rum. So it's set in Jamaica. Rum. Very central, but I felt really uncomfortable with it as well because I'm thinking, well, where did the rum come from? Where did the sugar labeler come from? So this is a rum, and it's called Equiano. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's the first African and Caribbean owned rum company.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and Equiano is actually the name of a man who was born in Africa, I think in 1745. So he would have just been a few decades older than the protagonist in the book. And then he was sold into the Caribbean, and he managed actually to sell rum on the side.
I didn't know that.
I didn't. Hopefully, I got all of this information off their website.
Sure.
It was a beautiful website, and so we are each drinking Equiano-based drink. I'm drinking what's called a Golden Stormy, and you have a Fresca rum cocktail.
Yes, which, delicious.
Yeah.
Like conscientious, yes.
Yeah, and they said they donate their profits back to freedom and equality projects.
That's amazing.
Across the globe. And
that's incredible.
Yeah, so hopefully we're going to have a good time, but we're maybe doing a little good.
Yes, that's fantastic.
Yeah. All right, and so now I'm going to get into the book. Who were you when you picked this book up?
That is a really great question, and it's funny. So I'm a historian by training. I was living in Clemson, South Carolina, which is quite a place.
I'm from North Carolina.
Oh.
I'm from Charlotte.
2 hours away.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, small world. But so I started my PhD at UVA, and I met a boy. Doesn't end well, actually.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Followed said boy to Clemson, South Carolina, and I put my degree on hold, basically. We got married. We probably should never have gotten married. No, it's okay. It's so long ago at this point, too, that it's... but I was really going through it because we'd separated. We were starting the divorce process. And I just, I'm from Maryland originally. I didn't know anyone really down there. Everyone was his friend. It was a really lonely kind of time. And I went to Clemson's book festival, and Marlon James was speaking. Wow. And he just was so powerful. Yeah. And he was on a panel, and they were talking about literature and history and race and all these things that I'm very interested in. My particular specialty is actually slavery. So just the things they were saying, and I just was like, wow, like I feel something positive for the first time in a really long time. And I went and heard him do a reading from his upcoming book, which is now published. It won the Booker Prize. It was great.
Was that the one?
The Brief History of Seven Killings of Bob Marley.
The Bob Marley book.
Yes, yes. And it's huge.
Yeah.
And it's another great book. But anyway, yeah. So I was, like I said, I was just in a really rough place. And so then I picked up this really rough book.
Okay.
And I didn't realize how intense it was going to be. But it inspired me actually to go back to grad school and finish my degree. Wow. Yeah. And it really, I felt, again, for the first time, just intellectually engaged. Yeah. Something was exciting. And I was really inspired by what he was saying. And it was just, so kind of a weird story. Okay. But,
I love it.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
I mean, does he know this? Does Marlon James know this? Maybe not.
I don't know.
We're going to have to. He needs to know.
I don't know if he knows. I've seen him speak, at other places, and he's a wonderful speaker. Yeah. Like a really interesting person, really thoughtful. Yeah. So, yeah. That'd be cool if he knew.
Well, I'm going to have to check and see if he's on socials, and I'll tag him. You have to listen.
Yes.
No pressure.
You changed this girl's life,
Yeah.
Like, oh, God, what a crazy person,
I'm glad that, once again, I always find, so much beauty that comes from writing, and hearing other people's experiences can lift us up out of our own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just, I had sort of put my own ambitions, my own path, on hold for this mean boy. Oh. I know. So it felt good to find myself again in some way, and go back to something that was really important to me. Yep.
And then, so you're from Maryland, then you went to UVA, and then you came to Richmond.
Yes. So I was working in Charlottesville, and then COVID happened, and everything, we all know what happened.
Right. Yeah. We were there.
Yeah. But yeah, so yes, I ended up in Richmond. I interned at the Library of Virginia when I was in grad school, and started working there. I had started with a part-time job, and then it became full-time, which is how I met Nan.
Yes, shout out to Nan who connected us.
Yes.
And wonderful.
She's lovely. I love her. So I worked there almost 2 years, and now I'm at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, which is just, up the road. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the book.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
What protagonist story? I'm going to let you guide us through.
Yeah, so the book is about an enslaved young woman. She's a teenager, on a plantation in Jamaica. And it's really interesting. What I really find compelling about the book is it's not, no one's all good, no one's all bad.
Yeah.
It's like a deeply human book about a really inhumane subject. But the characters were all really well written, really well developed. It's a complicated story, so I won't give away too much because everyone should read it.
Yeah.
No spoilers.
Right.
But Lilith is the daughter of an enslaved woman and the plantation's overseer. And the overseer had many such daughters. So there's a group of half-sisters called the Night Women, and they're plotting a rebellion on the plantation. And so Lilith is not on board entirely at the beginning, sort of joining their crew. She experiences extreme violence and also commits extreme violence. And there's an unlikely love story that comes out in the book, which is actually very fascinating. So Lilith gets involved with an Irish overseer, Robert Quinn. And I found that just a really interesting part of the story because it's talking about race and it's talking about status within this plantation slave society and how can you love in that. And it's just, it felt really human to me and really delicate. And and the book ends in flames. It is not an easy read. It's very graphic.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel gratuitous.
Yeah.
I feel like the violence, he writes very specifically, and it really encapsulates probably what it was like to live in these places and to experience this. And it was just so powerful to me. And what I also love about it is it's written in patois. So
okay, explain patois.
Yeah, so it's like the Jamaican dialect of English. So it's just a different form of English. I hate when people call it broken English because it's not. But it's if you go to Jamaica, you hear people speak like that today.
Yeah. The yaman.
The yaman. Yeah. Yes. All of that.
Right.
Which I thought was a really interesting and daring choice.
Right.
On the part of an author.
Right.
And it's not as inaccessible as people think. I think after a few pages, you actually get into the rhythm of it. Mm-hmm. And I will say too, just it lended a certain sort of beat and cadence to the book. It's very lyrical, it's very beautiful, and it just added this layer that I think if he'd written, I guess, in standard English in quotes, it might have not been as powerful in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read the book. I didn't do the audiobook, but I listened to at least one interview where they were like, you should read the audiobook.
I've heard that.
Listen to the audiobook because of the way the dialect comes across.
I've heard that, and I have not done the audiobook either, but I've heard it was really beautiful and really well done. Yeah. So maybe one day.
And maybe for us, and maybe, for people listening to this, they're curious that I've heard that recommendation, and give it a shot. Give it a go.
Why not? Yes.
I do want to say when we're talking about the language, it is very strong, and there's a lot of words.
Yes.
There's words that I would rarely use, and there's words that I would never use, and I would just let our listeners read between the lines on that.
Yes. It's not child friendly.
It's not.
Maybe an 18 and over book.
Yeah. But do you think that is accurate for the setting?
It felt accurate.
Okay.
And I think about the world he's describing is so harsh and so brutal. And it's a very sexualized book, and I think that's also a part of the experience of enslavement, particularly for women, that yes, we kind of know about it, but we don't talk about it actually that much.
Yeah.
So I think it was provocative in that sense, and I think it, was fairly accurate. It's also, I think back to this period in time, and it was just like a rough society. This was the late sort of 18th, early 19th century.
Yeah.
The Caribbean was in many ways somewhat of a frontier society. Kind of rough people went there.
Yeah.
And it was a brutal place to exist. So
yeah.
I think that it matched the pros.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to mention that in case.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a question. So what pulled you in about the subject matter? And we talked about like the story for you personally, but was the subject itself?
Like I said, I'm a historian. My specialty is sort of Caribbean, early American. It's called like British Atlantic history.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really this sort of time period that I'm most interested in. And so I will say I usually do not love books set in this time period.
Why is that?
I feel like a lot of authors use like really mannered language or it's like very precious.
Not in this one.
Not in this one, no. So that was refreshing. And also I was so impressed by his command of the history. It was very impressive. I was like, wow, you really studied this. You read the books,
And he's from Jamaica.
He is from Jamaica.
Yeah.
So, so I was just intrigued by the subject matter just by virtue of, I guess, what I'm interested in. And writing about slavery is hard, and I think it's also really easy to fall into traps of all good people and all bad people, right? And all of these characters had such nuance and complexity. Like, none of them were all good or all bad, and they all made mistakes, and they all did good things. And so there was, like, this challenge of, okay, like, how do I approach these characters as people, right? And I think he did a really beautiful job of making them all people and not cliches or stereotypes or standing for something, right? So
yeah, I don't think it's too spoiler. I can't remember when it happens in the book, so maybe it's a teeny spoiler. But there is a scene. Her father is the original overseer for the plantation that she lives on, and I mean he does horrible things.
Yeah.
But then there's parts that he also protects her in some ways. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think he really did a beautiful job bringing out the humanity in this entirely inhumane system and setting and showing that it was complicated,
Yeah. So. It's definitely complicated. I'm also curious. So, with all of our professions, you're a historian. Like, what is it that you love about history? Like, what got you into this field?
Interesting. That's a good question. Stories.
Okay.
Actually, I'm actually like a very bad academic historian.
Okay.
I don't really care about like theories and all these things, dates, blah blah blah. I'm interested in the stories of people and why things have turned out the way they have. Like, what choices did people make in the past to get us to where we are today? And again, just recognizing that everyone in the past is also just a person who did good things, bad things, made mistakes, did awesome things. Yeah, and it's just, I guess that's why I'm in a museum and not like a university, because I just like telling stories.
Okay.
Yeah, and so when a book like this comes along, that's just so beautifully rendered in terms of the history and then the characters and the language, it just like blew me away. And it really did. It inspired me to go back to school. Yeah, and it was just like, wow, someone can do this. Like, someone can write this way. It's wonderful.
Just curious, are you at all inclined to write yourself?
I do write.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I haven't published anything. I'm too shy.
That's
But
wonderful. What do you write?
mostly like creative nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And also just, sort of my personal stories, but also just reflections on history and race and Southern identity and things like that I find really sort of fascinating. So,
Okay.
yeah, one day I'll be
Yeah.
brave and try my hat in the ring.
Yeah. Well, I'm of course going to say you should.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm also just curious, like Southern identity.
Yeah.
I'm Southern.
Yes.
And it's a very complex identity.
It is. It absolutely is. And yeah, and I think the South is like one of the most beautiful places in the world, but also or in our country especially, but also one of the most dark, you know? And I think the stain of slavery is obviously that's the root of it, right? And I think, again, in a weird way, that's why I was drawn to this book, because it's exploring that paradox or that problem, right? But yeah, Southern identity. It's like you can be proud, but there's things to not be proud of. And at the same time, there's immense beauty and grace and kindness and so.
Yeah, and I love being Southern. My mother's side of the family is like screaming right now because my mother's from New York and I'm half Irish American as well. Love you guys.
Nice.
Yeah, but I was born in Atlanta. I grew up in Charlotte. So I'm making my way up the East Coast.
I was going to say.
I make it to New York by the time we're all done.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I've often thought about that as like, how do you balance those two things? And how do you love something?
Yeah.
That also, it's the same thing with the drink is like, so many of the things I love are things that like have its roots
exploitation and oppression. Yeah, I know. And I love these hard questions because they don't really have an answer. But it's really amazing to think about them. I don't know. Side note, have you ever heard of the bitter Southerner?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was like, you would like that.
Yes. And actually, I think I got my sweatshirt. Libraries are essential.
Yes, I think they have great t-shirts and sweatshirts and all that. I think that is from there, I think.
Okay,
yeah, they have great stuff. So it's an online publication. It's essays, photo series. I mean, they've expanded incredibly. They've published books now. And it's just, it's funny. I just love the name too. It's like the bitter Southerner. Well, it's also like from a drink. That was the original inspiration of bitters. Yes.
Okay.
Sort of like a pun though, because it's reflections on the South and its complexity and its the most, again, it's beauty and it's sort of terror at the same time.
Right.
So I love it. I love things that are nuanced, that aren't scared of going into the complications, that ask those kind of like really big, hard questions of who we are and how we got there.
Right. So getting into it a little bit, going back to the book, what's the vibe, would you say, of this story? I mean, there's a little magical realism in there.
There is, yes. There's magical realism. There's the vibe. That's an interesting. It's dense.
Yeah.
There's a density to it. But it also moves fast. There's like a lot of action. But I would say like the plot isn't the point necessarily in this book. It's more about the characters and their relationships to each other and themselves.
Right.
Dense is a vibe.
Dense is a
vibe.
We're saying
Dense is a vibe. Yeah. Like it's you kind of I finished it and I feel like I got hit by a truck. Like and I had to like stare at the wall for a little while to just, but in a good way. Like it hurt in a good way. Do you know?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, like it's a book that I read in 2014 and I still think about it and I've read it several times and every time I do I just find more. Yeah. Dense. Dense is a vibe.
Okay. I agree. And so the characters are super important to the story. So we know about Lilith. We know about her love, Robert Quinn. Who else have we got?
We have Homer, who is one of the Night Women. She's sort of the ringleader.
Yes.
And she does Obia. She has magic.
Okay, so tell us about Obia.
Yes, so it's I think voodoo is the wrong word. But it's a Jamaican like belief system. There's a lot of African traditions in it. It's like very connected with the spirit world. There's magic, there's potions, there's spells, things like that. Ghosts are a big part of it. So I also just feel like it is a little bit of that magical realism, but it casts this like beautiful shadow throughout the book in some ways. It's like the spirits are moving around you and things are happening that you can't explain and, you know, like harness all this magic.
Yeah.
So, like, it was cool. Like,
I'm curious. There's a few, also trying to avoid spoilers, but I know. Some of this happens very early on. There's a few deaths that occur that are by the characters attributed to Obia.
Right.
I mean, what you're like looking coquettishly off to the side, like I don't.
maybe not. You know. But yeah, was it magic? Was it a person?
Yeah.
I don't know, you know?
It's like, I need to learn some of these spells. Not to murder anybody, but just like to have in my back pocket.
Yeah.
Just in case. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
Like, it's useful.
Yes. So, but Homer practices Obia, and so do the other Night Women, right? That's sort of their whole thing.
And I think it's a form, too, of power, you know? They're all enslaved. They're, you know, very vulnerable in this place.
Right.
And it's a form of protection and power for people who don't have a lot of formal access to power. And sort of like manipulating their universe and controlling it. When, you know, ostensibly they're not in control of much of anything.
Right.
So I think it's an empowerment thing, too.
They can't even, there's scenes where Lilith, the main character, is like, she can't even leave the house because she's in danger of getting murdered. Not just by the slavers. Right,
but by other enslaved people. Right. Yeah. So that sense of danger, and it's, I guess the obi is also a form of protection, right? And like a shield in some way. Yeah.
Protect them a little bit. And then they have the other Night Women, does Lilith's relationships with them.
It was interesting because I got the sense in the beginning she didn't really want much to do with them.
Right.
She kind of thought, she was a little better than them in some ways. Although they are all sisters.
Yeah.
I always forget. And Lilith is the youngest of all of the sisters.
Right.
And I think there's always tension in those relationships because I think, Homer sees that she is a powerful and sort of magical person in some ways who kind of will do anything she has to do and wants to use that for her own ends, which is starting this island-wide rebellion of the enslaved. So that was another thing. I think the relationships between the women is really well done in this book. And it's also funny, he's a male writer, but he wrote women really well. Right. I think. Yeah, which is hard. That's usually not the case.
Yeah.
At all.
Right.
But I think they sort of had like a mother-daughter relationship in some ways too. There's love, but there's also frustration and there's competition. So it was interesting.
So we've talked a lot about like Lilith and the other slaves, but there's also the white people that live on the plantation.
Yes, Humphrey. If I remember correctly, he's the son of the owner.
Right.
And then there's his mistress, essentially.
Miss Isabel.
Yes. And she, I thought, was a very interesting character, too, because she is what I guess you'd call a Creole. So she's a white woman who was born and lived in the Caribbean. So she wasn't English or European originally.
So, like in some ways, they were also treated differently.
Oh, terribly. Yeah, exactly. And she, she's not nice.
She's kind of the worst.
She's terrible, but she also suffered a lot, and she was exploited and used, and and it was interesting to kind of see, like, the power dynamics of...
Well, between her and Humphrey's mom.
Yes.
Humphrey's mom is...
piece of work.
She really is.
Yes. So, like, how do women, what's their place in this society?
Yeah.
So... It was sort of interesting to parse out, like, the different levels of subjugation or exploitation.
Right.
And I think what, you come along out of this book saying slavery hurt everybody involved.
Yeah.
It like poisoned everybody.
Right.
Which is interesting.
So, yeah, I often, like, that first moment of enslavement.
Yeah.
All of the ramifications of it, and we're still experiencing it today.
We're still experiencing it, yeah.
And I think it's important for just the realization of it, and because it's the denial.
Yes.
It's when it's denied, when it's saying that, oh, they lived happy lives.
Right. It wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad. It was better than what they would have had.
Right.
No, like, there's story, like Homer, I think her moment is her children were sold away from her.
Right. Which happened every day.
Yeah.
Happened here in Virginia, you know, happened everywhere. And yeah, it's just, it's wild to think about that and how just commonplace it was.
Right.
It was just how you did business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oof. Like,
I was reading something particularly, and I'm sure it happened other places, but I was just reading a research paper that was done on this book, and it was talking about how common it was, particularly in Jamaica, for they wouldn't even care if their slaves died. They would just buy another one.
Exactly.
You know, it had nothing, almost like you're treated as less than human, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, and it's not that long ago.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of human history. Yeah, you know, like, this is rather recent.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the fact that we haven't really had an honest reckoning with this, both here and in, the Caribbean, but all over, it just perpetuates the problems. We can't get over it, right? Like, we can't move on, because we're still stuck. Like, I don't know. So,
well, it's like that therapy quote. It's like, what you don't work through works you.
Yes. Oh, I love
but we're
that.
Experiencing
I love that.
It, like, as a whole
culture.
Society.
Yes.
Yeah,
I like that. Like,
yeah. And I know there's some people that are going to say, well, this isn't the only place that happens. Like, that's 100% true. And it still happens today. It happens
everywhere.
But, I mean, this is a very specific thing that moved an entire economy for hundreds of years.
Yeah. Yes.
So.
Yeah. And it's, it changed the course of human history,
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting to, like, look back and all of these choices and all of these things that people did. Like, I don't think they had any idea, like, what would come of it. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
That's what I like about history. It's just like, we're all just living our lives, and then we make sense of it afterwards. Like, someone like me just, like, reads all your diaries and, I know, like, figures it out.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. And, like, I also want to point out, like, there's still the complex issue of, Robert Quinn. He's Irish.
Right.
Isabel, she's Creole.
Right.
And he talks about, like, he's not even allowed to stay at hotels.
Right.
And things.
Right.
So it's all of those things. But the thing is, when the generations come, his skin is still white. And so eventually, those things kind of fell off, too. So.
Yeah. No, it was interesting. He did a really good job, I think, of also interrogating, like, whiteness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what it meant, and what it means sort of still today. So
Yeah. So let's see. So I do have a question on here about this genre. So this is like a historical fiction, slavery.
Yeah. So
Do you read it often?
So it's funny. And it might offend some of your listeners, I hate historical fiction.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
But I
Tell
have
us
a
why.
very specific definition of historical fiction.
Okay.
See, I don't classify this as historical fiction. I think
Okay.
of this as a book that is set in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And historical fiction to me is always brought up like really bad, like trying to be like Jane Austen language, like using super like mannered things and just like, and this is like totally just my own weird like tick, you know, like I don't know. This has no basis in any sort of.
Okay, it's your opinion. Your
it's
feelings.
my opinion, yes. So I just sometimes feel like what I would think of as like very bad historical fiction just leans too heavy on a fake version of the past, or just sort of, I don't know.
But like maybe like a nostalgia.
Yeah, and it's like all these bodices, you know, and like can't do it.
Yeah.
But yes, it is technically, I guess, a historical fiction, right? It's literary. It's like literary fiction as well. It's very literary. It's like not pop culture at all, which I tend to be drawn towards like literary fiction. So,
okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree with you, and I think that is something I have a little bit of trouble sometimes with historical fiction, where it tries to whitewash the right term? It tries to rose-colored glasses situations and like I said, nostalgia maybe of like, oh, you know, these people they're living through this, but look how wonderful they were.
And it was a simpler time.
Yeah. It's like, no, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. It was actually not fun at all. You know,
Yeah.
I often think back, I'm just like, you know, this was like before penicillin, man. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you could like scrape your hand and get infected and then you died. You know?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't that great.
No, absolutely. And I think about like we were talking earlier, like I've thought so much about I had ACL surgery last year.
Right. You would not be walking.
I would just be hobbling for the rest of my life.
Right.
You know?
It's crazy.
So
yeah, and it's I think about that a lot, you know. It was dangerous. And you know, and I think, totally off topic, we've just become so sort of anesthetized in our current society because we have awesome things like ACL surgery and cars and penicillin.
Yeah.
So we have it pretty good, you know?
I think I agree we have it pretty good. Anyway, so we're not going to call this historical fiction. We're going to call it
my weird tick.
I love it, and I 100% hear what you're saying, and I get it. So we're gonna call this like more of like a literary fiction.
Yeah, I think it's more of a literary.
And that would kind of fit with like Marlon James. I was listening in preparation for this, and also just kind of getting into it, and kind of kicking myself that this is the first book by him that I've read because like they were talking about. What's the Bob Marley book again?
A Brief History of Seven Killings.
Okay.
Which is another wonderful book. It's very different, but it's great.
But that won the Booker
Prize.
The Booker Prize, and he's won the National
Book Awards
as well. And they were just saying he's eventually going to win a Nobel Prize.
I would not be surprised. Yeah, like he is very talented. His latest project is like a kind of like a science fiction trilogy, which is based on African myths.
Okay.
I read the first one and honestly I couldn't get into it. It's I'm not like a big science fiction, speculative fiction person. People love it. And it was well written. It's just like not really my cup of tea.
Okay.
But I appreciate it.
Yeah. And you read literary fiction regularly?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of nonfiction. I do love nonfiction. There's another book. I almost chose this one, but it's called The Known World by Edward Jones. And it's set here in Virginia, actually. And it's another quote-unquote historical fiction. It's about, I know.
We're going to destroy that genre by the time.
But it's the story of a free black family in the antebellum, in antebellum, Virginia. And the family they enslaved other people. So it's like another sort of complicated story.
Wow.
And it's beautiful book. Beautiful, beautiful book. So highly recommend people check that one out too.
Okay.
And it's a Virginia one. So,
yeah. Yeah, we love that.
Yes, it's set sort of in a fictional, like, Prince Edward County area.
Okay.
So
not too far.
Not too far. They mention name like Charlottesville, Nelson County. So it's like all Virginians will know kind of where it is.
Okay, cool. Well, I love that we're going to reterm it literary fiction.
Yeah.
And I also wanted, so we just talked a little bit about Marlon James.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you know about him that we should cover? We haven't.
He's gay.
He's gay. I did not know that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, which if you are familiar with like Jamaican culture, Caribbean culture, it has problems with homophobia. That's a pretty significant issue still.
Okay.
You know. But yeah, he came out shortly after he won the Booker, which is very interesting.
Yeah, because he's
a professor.
He's a professor. I'm just guessing his age. He's probably in his early 50s at this point.
Probably somewhere around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like young,
Right.
He's not an older person.
Right.
But yeah, he teaches at McAllister College in Minnesota, which is hilarious. Can you imagine like a Jamaican man in Minnesota? Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't even move to Minnesota. No hate to our Minnesotan fans. I'm just not a snow person.
No. But yeah, I've heard him speak several times, like I mentioned, and he just, the brain in that man. It's amazing.
He sounds brilliant.
Yeah, and his books are all really, really different, and it's, he's one of my favorite contemporary authors, absolutely, so.
Well, I definitely am planning on reading the
Brief history of 7 killings.
I gotta say,
there's there's a lot more than 7 killings in the book. Just so you know.
Okay.
It's another violent one.
Yeah, but I recently, I think it came out in 2014, right? I was listening to something. They were talking about like the best books of 2014, and they talked about this, and they talked about A Brief History of 7 Killings, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm reading the Book of Night Women right now, and that's when I was like, why haven't you read this yet? Why haven't you read him yet? So anyway, I'm
really good.
Looking forward to pick up more.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
It's another big one, though, too. It's very long.
I'm reading a lot of long books these days.
He has a lot of words.
Okay. Well, but I've been really happy that you introduced this book to me and introduced him to me. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for having me on. This is great.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, like, about you. So what have you got going on? Is there anything you want to put a spotlight on for yourself?
Yeah, actually. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So I work, again, like I said, at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. We have a beautiful exhibit up now on Rosenwald Schools, which Rosenwald Schools was a program started in the early 20th century by Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald, who was the son of Jewish immigrants from Germany. And he was the president of Sears. Yeah. Yeah. And like he was very wealthy, very successful. And he teamed up with Booker T. Washington, realizing that public school education for Black students in the South either did not exist or was just abysmal, just in terms of funding and the buildings. And they put together a program called the Rosenwald Fund, and later became known as Rosenwald Schools, where the Rosenwald Fund would give a certain amount of seed money to a community. And the Black community would have to donate land, labor, time, or money to create a school, a public school for Black children. And the white public school system would also have to contribute funds and promise that it would fund the school and keep it running. So it basically created education for Black Southern students in a and it just in a place that they did not have any.
Okay.
And it was wildly transformative. It changed the face of Southern education and American education. And so we have a show up, and it's sort of framed on a series of photographs by a man named Andrew Filer, who went around the South and took these gorgeous photos of schools that are still standing. They're very moving, beautiful captions. And then we also have like a Virginia component. So it's really awesome. It's up till April 2025.
Okay.
So people have time to go see it.
Yeah.
It's really well done. So
Okay, wonderful.
it's cool.
Do we have any of the schools in like the Richmond area, do you know?
We do.
Oh.
Mostly Henrico, honest.
Okay.
But we have a map of all of them in Virginia, which is
Perfect.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, there were some in the Richmond area. They were mostly concentrated on the Tidewater, on South Side, and Central Virginia, which is where, of course, like the black population was the heaviest. So it makes sense. But yeah, there were 382 schools in Virginia. About 2/3 are demolished. They're gone. So it's really also like a preservation story where we're trying to raise awareness because a lot of community groups are renovating them, restoring them, turning them into like community centers and things like that. So it's a really cool story.
Oh.
Yeah,
Well,
go see it.
Go see it, and I'm gonna go see it. So I love that. So, well, thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much. This has been wonderful. You introduced me to a new book. I've made a new friend. That is
Yay,
you.
yes. Love it.
Yeah. So anyway,
Delicious cocktail.
delicious cocktails. So okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. There.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.